And now, from Intel Corporation, Carl Kempf.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Sid and I and our collaborators from ASU, Professor Esma Gall and Professor John Fowler, are very honored to be up here today as finalists in the Daniel H. Wagner Prize competition. Sid and I will present our work in 5 parts. I'll briefly give you a background, a few foils and background of Intel. I'll describe the business problem. Then Sid will come up and show the 5 parts of our mathematical approach to that problem. I'll talk about the decision process that those analytics fit into, and we'll close with the description of the business impact. Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore started Intel Corporation 46 years ago. Bob Noyce, well known as the co-inventor of the integrated circuit, and Gordon Moore, very instrumental in the development of the manufacturing processes to produce integrated circuits in high volume. And it's been Gordon's work in Moore's Law that stated in 1965, a long time ago, that we would be able to double the number of transistors on a given piece of silicon every 2 to 2.5 years. And that has held true over a very long period of time, and we don't see an end in sight yet. But that ever-decreasing size and power and cost of transistors has allowed us to leverage Bob Noyce's co-invention of the integrated circuit to make more and more complicated and more useful circuits. The first microprocessor in the upper right-hand corner had a few thousand transistors. In fact, in the lower left, our more recent products have now a few billion transistors. Actually, the next product to come out in this line has 7.2 billion transistors, one for each person on the face of the earth, by coincidence. In any case, our products are, you can find our products in the server market, in desktops, laptops, and increasingly in tablets and smartphones, and a variety of embedded applications. And this leads us to the statement of the business problem. Business problem that Intel has, but a business problem in addition that any large innovative company has. We have a number of products that we want to release into the markets, into our various markets, each of which bring us some benefit, but each of which require a number of engineering projects that are highly interrelated to each other and cost us something. The business problem, of course, is there's never enough budget to fund all of the projects in an innovative company. That's made more difficult by the fact that there are a number of qualitative and quantitative criteria that you would like to judge those projects by, so that your budget is allocated to maximize the benefit. The solution to the problem is then a portfolio of engineering projects that you've decided to fund, your plan. On the scale relevant to Intel and any other large company, this is far too difficult a problem to solve purely with intuition. On the other hand, there are also many more subtle business ideas than we can model analytically. So a crucial point to the work that we've been doing in this area is it has to be a back and forth. The analytics has to inform the business intuition. The business intuition has to inform the analytics. So we'll show you the analytics first in 5 pieces. There is a first mapping phase where the business analysts get all of the projects and the products and the relations between them straightened out. An enumeration phase, there are far too many permutations and combinations of funding these things to be done by hand. A valuation of all of those alternatives to set up the optimization to get a set of an ordered set of non-dominated portfolios, and then we do some mathematics after that to get ready for the what ifs that the business folks are going to ask us based on their intuition. The mapping helps the analysts visualize the interactions, all of the projects, all of the products, the interactions between them. Difficult because although we work in the server group, I mentioned to you we do servers, desktops, laptops, etc. We work in the server group, and the work we're showing you here is for the server group. even inside the server group, the information is distributed across the organization. So collecting it all up in one place is the first step. We won't have time to talk about the decision analysis ideas that we've used, that we've educated our analysts for to increase our data quality, but that's the interesting part of this. The map for the server group at Intel starts off with the yellow ovals that represent projects. The lower echelon of those projects are generally producing some sort of chip, some sort of piece of silicon. The next layer of projects are taking those chips and building platforms, boards, boxes, racks. There are other sorts of projects, generally sales and marketing projects, but customer reference boards, variety of materials that are required to get the products to go into the markets more effectively. So the projects produce the products go into the markets. We have a construct called prospects because, of course, there are times when we put one product in multiple markets. There are other times when we put multiple products in one market. And so the prospect of how that product is going to do in the market is a function of the pair. You see the data that we use down the side. The projects require budget because they have an engineering cost. There's a manufacturing cost associated with the products, estimates of the total available market and the share that we might expect. The relationships that make this problem very difficult are listed in the upper right-hand corner. The double arrow means required. If we don't fund project X, we can't do project D. If we can't do project D, we can't get product 3 into the market. There are other optional projects. Project C is supplying something of use to project B and D. We can fund that project or not. If we don't fund it, project B and D will cost more and take longer. In addition, we have lots of influences. It's often the case that if we introduce multiple products in the same market, they will influence each other. Hopefully, synergistically, occasionally cannibalistically. And we can include in this mapping a number of logical considerations. And if you do project X, you have to also do project Y. Or two flavors of OR. A soft OR, do project X or project Y or nothing. Or a hard OR, do project X or project Y. You have to do one or the other. And the number of sequence relationships. Our products sometimes come in sequence. If you don't do product 1, you can't do product 2 because product 2 builds off of product 1. I should add for scale that in the size of problems that we deal with, it's not uncommon to have of the order of between 200 and 250 projects, all interrelated to each other. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sid to talk about the next step in the process.
Thank you, Carl. So we've helped analysts and decision makers visualize their business, effectively map out all their projects and prospects. At this point, we need to enumerate each decision alternative that each portfolio unit can have. And by this, I mean that every portfolio unit, based on the scenario and based on the projects that are executed along with it, has an alternative that is worth a different amount from a different alternative. The next diagram will make this pretty clear. Here's a subset of a mapping with 4 projects, 2 products, and their prospects into a single market. The 4 projects don't have any incoming arrows and therefore don't have any real downstream relations, have a first-year spending and a remaining spending associated with them, and have only a single alternative. However, that changes when we look at C1, prospect C1, for example. Now, prospect C1's neighborhood is defined by this circle here. And we notice immediately that there are 8 possible decision units or alternatives for portfolio unit C1. Same can be said of C2. For example, C2 with its neighborhood is worth 23, but without engineering project 3, its value goes down by 3 million to around 20. In order to generate all possible decision units, we begin with an input, which is a portfolio unit, its neighborhood, and its relations, and get as output all possible decision units of a given portfolio unit. Our contribution to the space is an algorithm that automates most of this because it's difficult for individual decision makers to do it by hand, almost impossible. We start off by setting the IP and capturing all possible relations in the constraint set. We call the solver, check if the solution exists, add our own unique cut based on the solution derived, add it back to the IP, solve again until no solutions exist. This enumerates all the decision units possible for each portfolio unit. The next step is to actually assign quantitative numbers for various metrics for each of these decision units. And that brings us to the valuation stage. It's difficult because of the large number of correlated variables in each scenario that exists. We solve it, and our contribution is to combine user estimates and curve fitting forecasts to actually assign these values. The algorithm begins with an input, which is a set of decision units from the previous stage, and we get as output a list of metrics associated with each decision unit. Here's an example of what we mean. Here we find the realization of, let's say, revenue, for example, for a particular decision unit over time. The yellow bars indicate historical data. The red ones, predicted data. The upper half, the top of the bar represents the 90th percentile and the bottom the 10th percentile, and there are actually distributions of the realization of that variable for every time period t. And we do this for a number of different metrics, including ASP, volume, manufacturing, and engineering dollars. Our algorithm works by capturing the historical realization of the simulation variables, at the same time capturing expert estimates through questionnaires, using both of these to execute certain historical curve fitting and REMA models, and then use the combined estimates to run a custom Monte Carlo simulation to derive our required output. Now that we've actually delineated all the decision units we can execute and assigned quantitative values to them, we've now set ourselves up for the optimization. The optimization is difficult because of the sheer number of relationships that go and having to respect the integrity of the scenario where a particular decision unit is selected in. Our contribution to this is an optimization algorithm that quickly generates a set of non-dominated portfolios. This graphic should explain what I mean really well. We start off by optimizing for NPV and generating an unconstrained portfolio with no spending restrictions whatever. We then add the following three cuts: an objective cut, cutting off the solution itself, and then cutting off the spending. And then generating an ordered set to give decision makers and analysts an efficient frontier that orients them on the possible alternatives in the solution space. Our algorithm begins by taking the decision units and its associated attributes that we got from the previous two stages, and as output, we get an ordered set of non-dominated portfolios. It works by, we first set up the IP. We put in constraints for one decision unit per portfolio unit, and then the inclusion and exclusion constraints that ensure that if a particular decision unit is selected, all its corresponding associated decision units are also selected. We call the solver, check if the solution exists, add a spending cut, and cutting off the previous solution, adding it back to the IP, and calling the solver again. And we do this again and again until there are no solutions left. Once we have a set of non-dominated portfolios, we calculate the convex hull and graph it as the efficient frontier. Now that we have a basic set of non-dominated portfolios with respect to NPV and spending, we move on to the what-ifs that analysts want to play. The difficulty arises because even simple what-ifs require really complex analytics. Our contribution is, of course, efficient IPs that quickly generate alternate portfolios based on different objectives or constraints, and a fractional binary integer program that helps optimize a nonlinear objective to maximize efficiency. And I'll talk a little bit more on the coming slides. The three main categories of what-ifs that we allow analysts to play are optimizing on different objectives, such as revenue and volume, constraining on different resources, dollar budgets or headcount budgets, and adding and deleting projects to determine impacts. We'll talk a little bit about this one in detail, because adding or deleting projects is not as simple as just adding or subtracting its value from the portfolio. Adding or subtracting a portfolio unit may have very diverse and complicated consequences. So let's talk a little bit about maximizing efficiency. We've been seeing graphs of portfolio NPV versus portfolio spending for the next year. And this is a useful graphic for decision makers because the budget for the next year is known for certain. The graph on the right is portfolio NPV versus portfolio spending over the next 3 years. This is a less interesting graph because the budget over the next 3 years is often a variable. We see here the yellow portfolios, which are the non-dominated portfolios that define the efficient frontier when graphed against portfolio NPV versus next year. But the red portfolios are those that are efficient over NPV over the next 3 years. So the difficulty arises in generating these red dots and respecting budget constraints over the next year. Fact remains that some of these red dots might have very different spending profiles from the yellow one. The yellow one could be front-loaded and the back ones could be back-loaded, and so on. The input, therefore, is to maximize an efficiency while respecting budget constraints for the next year. And the output, of course, is a set of additional portfolios for analysts to peruse. We achieve this by transforming the variables and introducing certain linear variables for each one of the integer variables in the previous integer program and adding a series of cuts that now allows us to linearize the nonlinear objective function and add the same cuts and perform the same process we did before to generate an additional set of portfolios. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the impacts of adding and deleting projects. The incremental value report is a really useful tool for quickly summarizing the complex interactions that happen when a unit is dropped from a portfolio. As you can see here, dropping unit B actually increases the value of the portfolio. And dropping unit D causes a decrease in the value of portfolio 1 by around $7.2 million. Analysts often also want to drill down into the impact of dropping a unit. And we see this in the next report that shows that the value of dropping D actually arises both from the loss in value from unit D as well as B, which depends on D. And this report is quickly generated via an algorithm where we set up an IP and minimize the distance of the next generated portfolio unit while dropping that portfolio unit, and quickly generating the entire incremental value report for analysts to peruse. Which brings us to the next report, the Waterfall Report. The Waterfall Report is actually a trajectory. It actually gives you a path to move from one portfolio to the other. We've discussed generating a lot of different portfolios, and it could arise, and the situation often does arise, where analysts want to move from one portfolio to another. And the Waterfall Report provides a feasible trajectory from one to the other while detailing the impacts of each step. What's unique about the Waterfall Report is that every step on the way is a feasible portfolio, and this actually provides a real path. The Waterfall Report algorithm, of course, works on the fact that it finds the most negative step on the way, and that kind of explains why we had most of the negative impacts first and then the positive impacts. And it first attempts one-step changes, and if it doesn't find any, tries 2-step and 3-step changes. Because it could be that projects are so complexly interrelated that it is impossible to drop a single unit on the path from one portfolio to the other. The mathematical models we've detailed so far allow us to put us in good shape to actually force out portfolio units and determine its impacts in real time. And this is an extremely useful function for analysts for they can visually see what the impact of adding or dropping a project is, and uses much of the same IPs that the incremental value report uses. And it could so happen that adding Y and dropping X both cause a decrease in NPV, while adding a project causes a 4 million increase in spending and a decrease in 4 million spending. However, when going from this portfolio to this portfolio here, while we see a decrease in spending, we could realize an increase in headcount, for example. That's making this portfolio completely dominated by the other one. We avoid this by adding appropriate constraint cuts over headcount and volume and portfolio NPV to get truly non-dominated portfolios as we traverse the solution space. And now to see how the analytics informs the intuition, give it back to Carl.
Thank you. Thanks, Sid. So again, we started off by telling you that we were very interested in the analytics informing the intuition informing the analytics. Again, this is difficult because of the various flavors of objectives that we're under. The technique that we use is elimination by aspects. This gives the decision makers a very satisfied feeling that their intuitions have been applied in the appropriate way. And whenever you do elimination by aspects, you first decide what order you're going to visit them and then go execute on each one. We've seen the decision makers use a variety of orders. I'll give you one example here this morning. So they might, in this particular example, they use the budget aspect first. So they go to the intersection of the efficient frontier and the budget line and pick, let's say for sake of argument, 24 good-looking portfolios from that region. They don't want to, they're not particularly motivated to give budget back to the CFO, but they know on the other side that if they make a really good case, they might get a little more budget. So they pick some that are over budget as well. Usually we do this checking over multi-year budgets, as Sid indicated, so that we don't get ourselves in trouble by being optimistic this year and needing to find an extra bit of budget to keep it going. Strategy in this order is second. Strategy, one of the most useful reports, one of the most popular reports with the decision makers, is the strategy report, because there will be some, if I pick 24 portfolios, there will be some projects and products that are in all of them. And there may be some question about the strategic importance of one or more of those. At the bottom, there are certainly projects and products that were in the mapping that aren't in any of those 24. And here is frequently the case that someone of the senior decision makers raises the argument, this is strategically important, we need to get this in. The interesting, in addition, the most interesting discussions are about the ones in the yellow box. Those are the ones that are in some of the 24 portfolios, but not all of them. These are the ones that are coming in and out that you really have to decide between. In order to help them do that, we show them a product roadmap. The columns that you can't see very well here, given the lighting conditions, are quarters. So time on the x-axis, markets on the y-axis. The bars represent the products. The beginning of the bar is when the product is introduced to the market. The end of the bar is when the product is replaced by something else. And we give them a roadmap that has all of the products in the model, and show them in gray ones that they don't get in the portfolio that they're looking at, ones in color that are in the portfolio. And now we get into the discussion of, gee, 2 weeks ago we promised this one to one of our favorite customers, rerun the optimization with the instruction to not show a portfolio that doesn't have that product in. Or it may be the case, I've seen one case where one of the decision makers had special knowledge that this project was going to be delayed by 6 months. We were far enough behind the competitors already that if we delayed for another 6 months, it was silly to do it. So let's re-optimize, instruct the optimizer not to show us a portfolio that has that product in it. And of course, the incremental value report that Sid showed you helps helps figure out what's going to happen if you pull a project in or out. Or if you're looking at a bigger picture between two of these portfolios, you're narrowing down. The Waterfall Report gives you a very good idea of what's actually going on if you go from one to the other. Resources in this sequence is next. Of course, we've used resources as one of the potential constraints in the optimization. But if we solve it unconstrained, we get an idea of how many resources a particular portfolio will take, and perhaps more importantly, what the skill set mix needs to be. This gives the senior managers the opportunity to pick a portfolio that might not actually be resource feasible today, but given their knowledge of how they can rearrange between business groups, the skill sets and the people, hire some new people, retrain some people, gives them an opportunity to look at the resource picture. This is an interesting cartoon. In this sequence, they look at balance. We jokingly inside our group call this the Garrison tree. Tom Garrison is one of the decision makers here. He came up with the idea that he wanted to see how we were balancing our investments amongst the business units, and insisted that we show him a biological tree, not a mathematical tree. So in this particular case, the branches are the different parts of the business. This is the server business. Here's enterprise. Here's high performance computing. Here's high-end workstations, etc. The leaves we have used for a variety of things. The leaves can represent projects, either how much dollar budget they require or how much headcount they require. The leaves can represent products. How much NPV do we get back? What's the volume expectation? Sometimes we've used colors. It's useful to use colors to distinguish the projects that are in flight and we're funding to keep them going versus the new projects that are just starting up, versus the projects that have been forced in by some senior decision maker because they're strategic. Interesting to see the balance there. In addition, we've used the ratio of NPV and spend. Another one that ties into the roadmap is the color indicates the year in which the product is going to enter the market. The last aspect I can't tell you very much about, for the simple fact that Sid and I are never allowed in the room when the final special aspects from the special knowledge from our most senior management get from the last 2 or 3 or 4 down to the last one. I assure you, those are from the people who I talk to who are in the room. These are very interesting discussions. Someday perhaps I'll get to listen in. So the old process was based on advocacy. The senior vice president would get an hour with each of the staff members to bias them on what are the important projects in my arena. When we first started to look at this process, we actually talked to 2 different groups of people. We looked at a lot of the commercial portfolio management software that was in the market, and we went and talked to some folks who actually use portfolio ideas to run their business, mostly in the petroleum business and in the pharmaceutical business. And we came away with 2 conclusions. We were underwhelmed by the math. We thought we could do better math. And it was clear to us that we needed much higher quality data to do portfolio analysis than we were using in the advocacy process. So we kicked off the data quality part of the program that we haven't talked to you about today, and the decision quality part that we have talked to you about. When I sit with the senior executives who have used this tool now, the most popular words I hear are quality and transparency. They get it. If, for example, I'll give you a concrete example. If, for example, in the times that we've run the advocacy process and our process in parallel with 250 projects, and we suggest something, there doesn't have to be an argument about 250 projects. You can see from our analysis that it's these 6 that are causing trouble. These 2 are overfunded. These 4 are underfunded. So the transparency is a big selling point with our folks. Inside the company, we were able to try out our approach with a part of the server business in late 2011. The senior vice president liked that enough to give it a full trial in mid-2012 for the whole server business, which is about 20% of Intel's revenue. It's now, since the end of 2012, this has been the process of choice. The senior vice president considers this to be mission critical. It takes about 2 weeks for 3 dozen analysts to get through the mapping, the enumeration, the valuation, to get ready for the senior managers to use the tool. The senior vice president and her staff spend sometimes a day, sometimes 2 days. The mid-year plan is sort of how's the plan going? So that's more of a 1-day operation. The end of year plan is planning into the future. That usually takes a couple days. They then review the output with the CEO and the president and the CFO for a couple of hours. I say time and effort cut by more than half for the simple fact that I don't have really good data on how long it took with the advocacy process to do all this. And I can assure you those first 2 trials of our approach took longer than the advocacy process because we were building the mapping from scratch. We were improving the data quality from scratch. We're reliably informed now by the people who actually execute the process that this takes them less than half the time that it did before. The 10% improvement in portfolio is data from the times that we've been able, that the senior vice president wanted to run her advocacy process and our process in parallel to convince herself that this was really working. And in her business, she's given us a number of awards for increasing the value of her business by 10%. It's in the process now that the CEO and the president and the CFO have seen multiple reports out of this. This is obviously going through the desktop business, the laptop business, et cetera. The project, this is my last file. The project is actually, we've implemented it in C#. We use WPF for many of the visualizations, CPLEX for the calls to the optimizer. We run it on what, by Intel standards, is a little teensy-tiny server. As I mentioned before, the problem normally has a few hundred projects and products associated with it. The analysts access it through their laptops. The enumeration's fairly quick. The valuation with all the Monte Carlo takes quite a time on this server. But we've worked really hard on the optimization and the preparation for the what-ifs because, of course, that's what's going on live with the decision makers in the room playing out their what-ifs. So we're quite happy with that. We're happy with 30 seconds. I've never built a decision support tool when the users called up and said, gee, slow this thing down. It runs too fast. So we're still working on improving it, but 30 seconds and it is pretty good to keep the attention of a group of senior managers. And with that, I'll close, noting simply that this is one of the projects that we work on towards the corporate vision of connecting and enriching the lives of every person on Earth. And we'll now be more than happy to try to answer any questions you have.